If someone had told me 10 years ago that the great love of my life would be my neighbor's brother, a man who looked like he wrestled bears for a living, I would have laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full, disbelieving, borderline hysterical laugh. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments, a fortress of solitude built from beige walls and predictable routines. Love wasn't on the agenda. Connection was a risk I had long since decided I couldn't afford. My apartment was my sanctuary. Number 4B. 2 rooms, a galley kitchen, and a small balcony that overlooked a shared, perpetually damp courtyard. It was my world, contained and controlled. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, creating book covers for stories I would never be brave enough to live. My days were measured in keystrokes and coffee refills, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant, muffled sounds of the city. Next door, in 4A, lived Sarah. She was noise and color and chaotic energy, the complete antithesis of my existence. We had a nodding acquaintance, a relationship built on holding the lobby door and accepting packages for one another. I knew the rhythm of her life through the wall. The morning rush, the toddler's tantrums, the loud phone calls to her mother. She was a known quantity, a predictable part of the background noise I had learned to tune out. Then he arrived. I saw him first from my window. He was on Sarah's balcony, leaning against the railing, a cigarette held loosely between his fingers. He was big, not just tall, but broad, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt. Even from a distance, he projected an aura of coiled energy, a stillness that felt more like a predator's pause than genuine rest. He was so unlike the soft, artistic men I sometimes sketched in my private notebooks. He was all hard lines and sharp angles. He was, I assumed, aggressively, undeniably straight. He was Cole, Sarah's brother. I learned this through the wall. Her voice, unusually high and strained, carried through the plaster, arguing about him staying, about him needing a place to get his head straight. His voice was a low rumble, indecipherable but steady, a counterpoint to her frantic soprano. Seeing him became a new, unwanted part of my routine, a snag in the smooth fabric of my day. I'd catch him in the hallway, and his sheer physical presence would seem to suck all the air out. I'd find myself holding my breath until he passed. He'd give me a short, non-committal nod, his eyes, a startling, clear blue, skimming over me without really seeing me. To him, I was just a quiet guy from 4B, a piece of the scenery, and I was determined to keep it that way. My heart, that frantic bird I kept caged in my ribs, had other ideas. It would batter itself against my bones whenever he was near. A stupid, reflexive betrayal. I hated it. I hated him for causing it. This quiet, solitary man who was just passing through, disrupting my peace without even knowing my name. He was a stone tossed into the placid pond of my life, and the ripples were making me dizzy. The distance between our apartments, a few inches of drywall and insulation, felt both like a mile-wide chasm and a dangerously thin membrane. The storm was not in the forecast. Not a storm like this, anyway. It arrived with a sudden, violent fury, a temper tantrum thrown by the sky. The wind screamed, a high, thin wail that made the old window frames of our building moan in protest. Rain came down not in drops, but in solid sheets, blurring the world outside into a gray watercolor mess. I was at my desk, trying to focus on the cover for a historical romance, but the rising shriek of the wind kept pulling my attention. The lights flickered once, twice. Then, with a final pathetic buzz, they died, plunging my carefully ordered world into a disorienting gloom. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than my usual quiet. The hum of the fridge was gone. The low thrum of the city was swallowed by the storm's roar. It was an absolute, unnerving stillness within the chaos. I sat there for a long moment, my hands hovering over my keyboard. My routine was broken. The control I cherished was gone, snatched away by a tantrum of barometric pressure. A familiar, cold tendril of anxiety began to curl in my stomach. I hated this. I hated the unpredictability, the feeling of being powerless. A frantic knocking on my door made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a desperate, panic banging. My first thought was that the building was on fire. My second was that I didn't want to open the door. I wanted to pretend I wasn't home, to curl up in the dark and wait for the world to right itself. But the knocking was relentless, and it was Sarah's voice, thin and sharp with panic, calling my name. Leo, please, are you in there? Taking a deep breath, I slid off my chair and navigated the darkened living room, my hands brushing against familiar furniture. I unlocked the door and pulled it open a few inches. Sarah stood there, her face pale in the dim hallway light, her toddler clinging to her leg, crying. Her dog, a huge, goofy golden retriever named Buster, whined at her side. "The power's out," she said, stating the obvious. A tree came down on the main line at the end of the street. "They're saying it could be days." I just nodded, unsure what she wanted from me. "Listen," she rushed on, "I have to get Maisie to my mom's. She's terrified of the dark, but they're allergic to dogs. I can't take Buster." She gestured helplessly at the big, panting animal. "And Cole. He needs to stay to deal with the insurance people tomorrow about the roof damage." My stomach tightened. I knew where this was going. "Your apartment," she said, her eyes pleading. "You have that gas stove, right? And your windows face the courtyard. They're more protected. Ours are rattling like they're going to explode." She took a breath. Can they just stay with you? Just until the power is back? He can sleep on the couch. He won't be any trouble." I swear, forced proximity. The two words slammed into my brain. This was not a minor disruption. This was an invasion. This was my carefully constructed fortress being breached by the one person who made my internal compass spin wildly. I wanted to say no. The word was right there, on the tip of my tongue. "No, I'm sorry, it's not a good time. No, I'm not comfortable with that. No, it was my right. This was my space." But then I looked at her, at the genuine fear in her eyes, at the crying child wrapped around her leg. And behind her, stepping out of the shadows of her open doorway, was Cole. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his sister, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. He hadn't asked for this. He was being offered up like a piece of luggage. Something in his posture, a quiet acceptance of the situation, broke through my panic. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign and strange in my mouth. "Okay, he can stay." Sarah's relief was a physical thing, a visible sagging of her shoulders. "Oh, thank you, Leo. Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." And just like that, the walls of my fortress came down. Cole was inside. The first few hours were a symphony of awkwardness. Sarah left in a flurry of instructions and gratitude, leaving me, Cole, and the enormous dog in the echoing silence of my apartment. Buster, at least, seemed happy, his tail thumping a steady rhythm against my couch as he sniffed every corner of his new domain. Cole stood in the middle of my living room, a duffel bag at his feet, looking entirely out of place. He was a figure carved from granite set down in a dollhouse. He seemed too big, too solid for my small, precise world. My collection of minimalist art prints and carefully arranged succulents looked fragile and ridiculous in his presence. "Sorry about this," he said. His voice, without the wall to muffle it, was deeper than I'd imagined. A low, gravelly sound that seemed to vibrate in the air. "It's fine," I lie my voice tight. I busied myself lighting candles, the small, repetitive action of comfort. Each flame was a tiny victory against the oppressive darkness. My hands trembled slightly. I could feel him watching me. It was a different kind of observation from the casual glances in the hallway. This was focused. I was no longer just a piece of the scenery. I was the man whose space he was now occupying. The power dynamic felt skewed and strange. He was the guest, but I felt like the intruder in my own home. I started to see him not as a monolith, but as a collection of details. Up close, I could see the faint network of lines around his eyes, etched there by sun or worry. A small, silvery scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection in his rugged facade. His hands, resting at his sides, were calloused and marked with the small nicks and scratches of someone who worked with them for a living. These weren't the hands of a man who sat at a desk. They were hands that built things, that fixed things. You got a flashlight? He asked, breaking the silence. In the kitchen drawer, I said, pointing vaguely. The one by the sink. He moved past me, and for a second, the sleeve of his jacket brushed against my arm. It was nothing, a flicker of contact, but a jolt, hot and sharp, shot up my arm, making the muscles in my shoulder clench. My breath hitched. My heart did its stupid, frantic bird thing. Get it together, I hissed at myself internally. It was just cloth. He found the flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting a clean, white path through the gloom. He used it to inspect my gas stove, a relic from the 70s that I'd never once used. Mind if I try to get this going? We could at least boil some water for coffee or something. Be my guest, I said, retreating to a safe distance. He crouched down, fiddling with the knob. Got a match. I retrieved a box from the same drawer and handed it to him. I watched as he struck one, the flare of it momentarily illuminating his concentrated expression. He held the small flame to the burner, but his large hand was clumsy in the small space. The match went out. He cursed under his breath. He tried again. This time, as he moved the match forward, his hand shook slightly. The flame wavered, threatening to die. Before I could think, I moved forward. I knelt beside him, my own hand coming up to cup his, steadying it. Here, I murmured. Like this, the moment my skin touched his, the world stopped. His hand was warm and rough against mine. The calluses I'd observed from a distance were now a tangible reality, a startling texture against my smooth, soft skin. It was the most intimate physical contact I'd had with another person in years. Time seemed to stretch, to warp. I was acutely aware of everything. The scratch of his denim against my knee, the smell of him, a clean scent of soap and something faintly woodsy, mixed with the sharp tang of sulfur from the match. The sound of our breathing, suddenly loud in the small kitchen. The burner caught with a soft whoosh, a circle of blue flame blooming in the darkness. But neither of us moved. My hand was still on his. His fingers were still curled around the burned-out matchstick. His head was turned, and in the flickering blue light of the stove, his eyes found mine. That clear, startling blue. They weren't skimming over me anymore. They were looking right at me, and for the first time, I felt seen. There was a question in them, something I couldn't name. Surprise? Confusion? My heart was a drum against my ribs, loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. Let go, my brain screamed. Move away. This is dangerous territory. But I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in the intensity of his gaze, in the unexpected connection of our hands. Then he blinked. The spell was broken. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned, scrambling to my feet. There, I said, my voice thin and reedy. Coffee, right? I have a French press. I turned away, my back to him, fumbling in the cupboard for the coffee grounds. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the scoop. My entire body felt like a live wire. That single, simple touch had overloaded every circuit I had. It wasn't just cloth this time. It was skin on skin, a deliberate, shared contact, and it had changed the very air in the room. The power dynamic had begun to shift. In the outside world, he was a strong, capable one. But here, in my candlelit apartment, surrounded by my things, I was the one who knew the landscape. He was the one who was out of his element. Where do you keep the thing? He asked from behind me, his voice a little rough. The French press. I turned, holding it up. Right here, right? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that looked like pure frustration. I'm used to a drip machine. The kind you just push a button on. A small, unexpected bubble of humor rose in my chest. A bit of situational sarcasm, just for me. The big, tough guy, defeated by a glass pot and a plunger. It's complicated, I said, my tone drier than I intended. You have to boil the water, pour it over the grounds, wait exactly 4 minutes, and then press. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines. Right. Rocket science. I took the pot from him. I'll handle the rocket science. You can. I don't know. Keep the dog from eating the furniture. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. Deal. As I measured the coffee and waited for the water to boil on the newly lit stove, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. The anxiety was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was being overlaid by something else. A feeling of competence, of being in charge. Later, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, sipping the strong, hot coffee from mugs, the storm outside felt less like a threat and more like a cocoon, wrapping us in a world of our own. So, he said, breaking a long silence. Book covers. He gestured with his mug toward my desk, where my monitor sat dark and useless. That's what you do. I was surprised he'd noticed, or remembered if Sarah had ever mentioned it. Yeah, graphic design. Mostly for indie authors, huh? He took another sip. Must be cool. Creating something people see first. It's a job, I said, shrugging, downplaying it as I always did. It felt too personal to talk about, too much a part of my carefully hidden inner world. No, it's cool, he insisted, his gaze direct. You have to read the book? Get the feel of it. Sometimes. Or I get a synopsis. A brief on the tone, the genre. I'd be terrible at that, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. I fix things. Broken walls, leaky roofs. If it's tangible, I can handle it. Ideas, not so much, and there it was. A moment of vulnerability. An admission of a perceived weakness. It leveled the playing field even more. He wasn't just the strong, silent type. He was a man who understood his own limitations. The night wore on. We talked. Not about anything important, really. About bad movies, the city, his job as a contractor, my strange collection of plants. It was easy, frighteningly easy. The initial awkwardness had melted away, leaving behind a comfortable quiet between sentences. Buster snored softly on the rug between us, a furry, breathing bridge. At some point, the rain softened to a drizzle, the wind to a whisper. The candles burned low, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The apartment felt smaller, more intimate than ever. A bubble of warmth and flickering light in a dark, silent building. We were both quiet, listening to the drip of water from the eaves outside. The coffee was long gone. I should have suggested we figure out sleeping arrangements. I should have offered him blankets for the couch and retreated to the safety of my bedroom. But I didn't want to. I didn't want the night to end. It's quiet in here, he said softly, his voice barely disturbing the stillness. He wasn't looking at me, but at the flame of the candle on the coffee table. My sister's place, it's never quiet. I'm used to it, I said. The quiet, he turned his head, his profile sharp in the dim light. Yeah, but this is a good quiet. Not the empty kind my breath caught. He had just put words to a feeling I'd been chasing my whole life. The difference between solitude and loneliness. Between a chosen peace and a hollow ache. I know the empty kind, he continued, his voice dropping even lower. That's why I'm here. At Sarah's, he paused, and I knew he was deciding whether to continue, whether to trust me with something real. The air crackled with the weight of the unspoken. I didn't just come here between jobs, he finally admitted, the words coming out in a rush. My ex-girlfriend, we broke up. After 5 years. She said the house felt empty even when I was there. He let out a harsh, humorless breath. Guess she was right, a confession. Dropped into the small, safe space we had created. It was an offering, a piece of his real, messy, vulnerable self. And my first instinct was to protect it. My own walls, the ones I thought were made of stone and steel, felt like paper. Something in his honesty gave me a reckless surge of courage. The darkness was a shield, the candlelight a confessional. My whole life is the empty kind, I heard myself say, the words tasting like rust, like a truth I hadn't spoken aloud in a decade. I just got good at furnishing it, arranging the furniture, so it looks intentional. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't awkward or comfortable. It was charged, humming with the electricity of 2 exposed nerves. He shifted on the couch, turning his body to face me fully. The distance between us suddenly felt immense, a canyon I wanted to cross. Why? He asked, his voice gentle. Why what? Why furnish the emptiness? Why not find someone to fill it? The question was so direct, so simple, yet it hit me like a physical blow. A bitter, sarcastic laugh escaped me. It's not that simple. The world is full of people. Doesn't mean it's not empty. I look down at my hands, twisting in my lap. And people, they're a risk. They leave. Or they were never meant to stay in the first place. I was talking about him. I was talking about us. About this impossible situation. I risked a glance up at him. He was watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The candlelight carved hollows under his cheekbones made his eyes seem impossibly dark and deep. The air was thick, heavy. I could feel the pull of him, a gravitational force I was powerless to resist. He started to speak, then stopped. He wet his lips. The small, unconscious movement sent a tremor through me. And then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward. He moved with a glacial slowness, giving me every opportunity to pull back, to protest, to break the spell. My mind was screaming, this is a mistake. He's vulnerable. He's confused. He's straight. But my body was frozen, my gaze locked with his. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. His face was inches from mine. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. I could see the flicker of the candle flame reflected in his pupils. He paused, his eyes asking a final, silent question. I gave him my answer with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His lips met mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was soft, hesitant, unbelievably gentle. It was a question, a discovery. His lips were chapped, slightly rough, and they tasted faintly of coffee and something that was just coal. The initial shock gave way to a slow, melting warmth that spread from my lips through my entire body, chasing away the last of the cold anxiety. I brought a hand up, my fingers trembling as they rested on his jaw, feeling the rough stubble there. The contact seemed to embolden him. He deepened the kiss slightly, a soft pressure that was both a request and a statement. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had. It spoke of loneliness and longing and a surprising, terrifying spark of hope. It ended as gently as it began. He pulled back slowly, his forehead resting against mine for a moment. His eyes were closed. I could feel his breath, warm and a little unsteady, mingling with my own. Leo, he whispered, my name a fragile sound in the stillness. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. We stayed like that for a long time, foreheads touching. The world shrunk down to the space between us, the only sound our shared breath and the beating of my own frantic, frantic heart. I don't know when we fell asleep. The candles had burned down to puddles of wax. The sky outside was beginning to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. One moment we were sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and a fragile, unspoken truce, and the next I was waking up. Alone. My eyes fluttered open to the gray light of dawn. I was curled on the couch, the blanket tangled around my legs. The apartment was cold. The silence was back, but it was different now. It was the empty kind. I sat up, my heart starting a slow, heavy thud of dread. Cole! I called out, my voice raspy with sleep. No answer. The first thing I noticed was that Buster was gone. The second was the sudden, jarring hum of the refrigerator kicking on. The power was back. The clock on a microwave blinked a cheerful, mocking 12 o'clock. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I scrambled off the couch. His duffel bag was gone from the spot by the door. The mug he'd used was washed and sitting in the drying rack by the sink. It was as if he had never been here, except for the note. A single piece of paper torn from my own notepad sitting on the coffee table. My hand trembled as I picked it up. For words, written in a blocky, unfamiliar script. Thanks for everything. Cole. The paper felt like ice in my hand. My stomach plummeted, a sickening, dizzying drop. The air rushed out of my lungs. Thanks for everything. The kind of note you leave for a stranger who held a door open for you. Impersonal. Final. A dismissal. The spiral began immediately, a vicious, downward plunge into the darkest corners of my own mind. He's gone. He ran. Of course he ran. What did you expect? The kiss. That soft, hesitant, world-altering kiss. My mind replayed it, but now the memory was tainted, poisoned. It wasn't a connection. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness on his part, a lapse in judgment brought on by darkness and vulnerability. He was grieving a 5-year relationship. He was lost, and I was just a port in a storm, a convenient, quiet place to wait out the bad weather. My cheeks burned with shame. I felt used. I felt foolish. My carefully constructed world, my fortress, had been breached, and I had not only allowed it, I had welcomed it. I had let him in, and he had taken something I didn't even know I had to offer, then vanished with the first light of day. The quiet of my apartment, once a comfort, was now a suffocating presence. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was a crime scene. Every surface held the ghost of his presence. The indent on the couch cushion next to mine. The scent of his soap, faint but still lingering in the air. The memory of his hand in mine, his lips on mine. My solitude, which had been a choice, now felt like a life sentence. The loneliness I had managed to furnish and disguise was now laid bare, a raw, gaping wound in the center of my living room. He hadn't just filled the emptiness for a night. He had shown me exactly how vast and deep it truly was. And then he'd left me alone with it. A whole day passed, then another. I didn't leave the apartment. I canceled a meeting with a client, claiming a migraine. The thought of going out, of potentially seeing him in the hallway, was unbearable. What would I do? What would I say? The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Through the wall, I heard Sarah return. I heard her cheerful, loud voice, the thud of Buster's tail against a wall. But I didn't hear Cole's low rumble. He wasn't there. He had gone back to whatever life he had before, leaving me in the wreckage. Every time I heard footsteps in the hall, my heart would stop. My entire body would go rigid, listening, waiting, but the footsteps always passed my door. The silence that followed was a fresh wave of disappointment, a confirmation of my own stupidity. He wasn't coming back. I tried to work. I sat at my desk, the bright light of the monitor hurting my eyes. I stared at the half-finished book cover, a swirling mess of colors that now seemed garish and meaningless. I couldn't focus. My own internal monologue was too loud, a repeating loop of self-recrimination. You knew better. You always knew better. People are a risk. The second night was the worst. The darkness felt different. It wasn't a cocoon anymore. It was just dark. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the memory of his weight on the couch, the sound of his breathing haunting me. The absence of him was a physical presence in the room, a coal-shaped hole in the fabric of my life. I had been lonely before, but this was a new species of loneliness. It was acute, specific. It was the loneliness of knowing what you were missing. Before Cole, my solitude was a familiar landscape. Now it was a wasteland. He had shown me an oasis, let me take a single sip, and then led me back into the desert. By the third day, a grim, bitter resolve had begun to set in. I would rebuild. I would patch the hole in my fortress wall. I would reinforce the barricades. I would forget the feel of his hand, the taste of his kiss. I would go back to my quiet, ordered life. I would be fine. I had always been fine on my own. I was a liar. It was late afternoon on that third day. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray. I was standing in my kitchen, about to make another cup of coffee I didn't want when I heard it. A knock on the door. It wasn't frantic like Sarah's had been. It was a soft, hesitant knock. 2 quick raps. My blood turned to ice. My heart stopped, then started again with a painful, violent lurch. It couldn't be. It was a delivery. It was a neighbor. It was anyone but him. The knock came again, a little more insistent this time. I stood frozen in my kitchen, unable to move, barely able to breathe. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let whoever it was go away, to stay safe in my misery. But another part of me, a stupid, hopeful, traitorous part, was already moving my feet toward the door. I looked through the peephole. It was him, Cole. He stood in the hallway, his shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his jaw was tight with tension. He wasn't the confident, solid man from the other night. He looked lost. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. My hand rested on the doorknob, my thumb stroking the cool metal. This was it. The confrontation I had been dreading, and if I was honest with myself, secretly praying for. I took a shaky breath and opened the door. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, his blue eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't decipher. Regret? Apology? He looked from my face down to the floor, then back up again. Hi, he finally said, his voice rough. Hi, I replied, my own voice of strangers. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to appear casual, unaffected. It was a pathetic performance. My heart was a hummingbird trapped in a shoebox. An awkward silence stretched between us, thick with everything that had happened and everything that hadn't been said. I'm sorry, he said, the words coming out in a rush, as if they'd been dammed up behind his teeth. For just leaving. That note was cowardly. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to be cold and dismissive. But looking at him, at the genuine pain in his eyes, all I felt was a deep, gut-wrenching ache. I freaked out, he continued, running a hand over his tired face. I woke up, and the power was on, and it was light out, and I just panicked. That's never happened to me before. He looked at me, his gaze pleading for understanding. With a guy, there it was. The truth I had been telling myself all along, now confirmed. It had been a first for him, a confusing, frightening first. I went back to Sarah's, he said, and it was so loud. The TV, the baby, Sarah asking me a million questions about the insurance, about my ex, and all I could think about was how quiet it was in here. He took a hesitant step closer, and I realized the quiet in your apartment. I don't think it was the apartment. He swallowed, his throat working. I think it was you, my carefully constructed anger, my bitter resolve. It all just dissolved. It evaporated, leaving me exposed and vulnerable and aching with a feeling so close to hope it terrified me. I shouldn't have run, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Because being away from you, trying to pretend that kiss didn't happen, it was 100 times scarier than the fact that it did. He had named it. He had said the word. Quiche. He wasn't pretending it was a dream. He was owning it. He was owning his fear, his confusion, his regret. He was standing at my door, laying his own vulnerability bare, just as I had done in the dark. I don't know what this is, he said, his eyes locked on mine. I don't have a map for this, Leo. I'm completely lost. He took another small step, closing the distance between us until he was standing just inside my doorway. But the one thing I'm not confused about is that I want to be here. Not because the power is out, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because you're here. He slowly raised a hand, not to touch my face, not to steady himself. He held it out in the space between us, palm up, an offering, a question. I looked at his hand, the same hand I had steadied in the dark, the same calloused, capable, surprisingly gentle hand. It was shaking just slightly. My own hand felt impossibly heavy as I lifted it. Time slowed down again, just as it had in the kitchen. The world narrowed to this single, terrifying, beautiful gesture. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, threading through them a firm, warm, definite grip. It wasn't a handshake. It was an anchor. It was a promise. Can I stay? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Can I try to figure this out? With you? I couldn't speak. I could only nod, a tight, jerky movement. A single tear I hadn't realized I was holding back escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. He raised his other hand and gently, so gently, wiped it away with his thumb. Okay, he breathed, a small, relieved smile finally touching his lips. Okay. He didn't kiss me again. He just stood there in my doorway, holding my hand, and for the first time in my entire life, the quiet in my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt full. It felt like a beginning. The days that followed were a strange and wonderful new kind of routine. Cole's boots became a permanent fixture by my front door, scuffed and mud-caked, a stark contrast to my own neat row of identical sneakers. His duffel bag found a home in the corner of my bedroom, a small, constant reminder that he was here to stay. We moved with a cautious, tender choreography, learning each other's rhythms. The first morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Not the artisanal hand-ground beans I used, but the cheap, robust kind from a can. Cole was in my kitchen, looking proud and slightly sheepish, holding out a mug for me. He'd used a French press. Wrong. He pressed it too fast, but it was the best cup of coffee I'd ever had. We started sharing meals. I taught him how to cook something other than scrambled eggs. He taught me that it was okay if you spilled a little olive oil on the counter, that not everything had to be perfect and wiped down immediately. My pristine kitchen became a little messy, a little more lived in. It became a place where we laughed. He would watch me work, fascinated. He'd pull up a chair and sit quietly for an hour, just observing as I manipulated shapes and colors on my screen. "I don't get how you do that," he'd say, shaking his head in genuine admiration. "How you make a feeling into a picture." His interest wasn't feigned politeness. It was real curiosity. He saw my quiet, solitary work not as a strange hobby, but as a kind of magic. And his belief in it made me believe in it more, too. Sleeping was the biggest change. The first night after he came back, we lay in my bed on opposite sides, a foot of tense, empty space between us. Neither of us spoke. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear his soft breathing. My anxiety was a low thrum. Then, in the middle of the night, he rolled over, his arm falling across my chest, and he mumbled something in his sleep. His body settled against mine, and instead of panicking, I felt safe. The anxiety quieted. I fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep I'd had in years. After that, the space between us and the bed disappeared. We slept curled together, my back pressed against his chest, his arm a heavy, comforting weight around me. His presence was a bulwark against the night, against the loneliness I had lived with for so long. Waking up was no longer a moment of anxiety, but one of quiet wonder, of turning my head on the pillow and finding him there, his face soft in the morning light. My life, once a straight, predictable line, was now a beautiful, chaotic mess. There were wet towels on the floor and 2 toothbrushes by the sink. There was the sound of his low chuckle as he watched TV. There was the solid, reassuring weight of his hand in mine as we walked down the street. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't define what we were. We just were, together. One evening, weeks after the storm, we were sitting on the couch. I was reading, and he was just watching the city lights come on from the window. He was quiet, and I felt a flicker of the old fear. The fear that this was all temporary. "What are you thinking about?" I asked softly. He turned from the window, a small smile on his face. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice warm, "that my sister called today. She asked when I was planning on getting my own place. My heart did a familiar, nervous flip. And what did you say?" He reached out, his hand covering mine on the book. His touch was firm, grounding. I told her I already have one. The 3 words I'd spent my life avoiding, "I love you," were not the ones that sealed our future. It was those 5 words. I told her I'm home. It was a quiet declaration, a simple statement of fact. This place, my place, was now our place. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He was home. I look back now at the man I was, the one who lived in 4B, who built a fortress of solitude to keep the world at bay. He was so afraid. He believed that safety was found in isolation, that peace was found in quiet. He had no idea that true peace wasn't the absence of noise, but the right kind of sound. The sound of another person's breathing in the dark. Cole wasn't the storm that wrecked my life, as I had once feared. He was the one who broke down the door of my self-imposed prison and showed me the sky. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that realigned my entire universe. He didn't just fill the emptiness in my apartment. He taught me that my life was never meant to be empty in the first place. He was, and is, the good quiet, the one that feels like coming home.